And let's see. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jim Hingle, and welcome to our October 2018 Hangout. This month, we're going to be talking about using Google Cloud Identity Secure LDAP with pfSense. So it's a new service they're rolling out now, and we'll go over how you can use that with pfSense. Just to note, since we have switched to YouTube Live, sometimes YouTube will auto-select the quality for you, and you have to go in and manually set it to 720p. So if the video looks fuzzy, just hover over the video, click the gear, go to quality until it's 720p instead of auto, and that way you'll get the full effect. Okay, well, this month we'll have news as always, and then we'll talk a little bit about what LDAP is, Google Cloud Secure LDAP service, what they're doing there, some example use cases, security concerns, a little bit about how you'll go about doing the setup on the Google Cloud side of things, setting up the pfSense side of things for CE or pfSense 244, and then we did change it a little bit in factory 244p1. We made it a little bit easier there. And then we'll go over how to create the groups on pfSense and testing everything, and then using that for your firewall login, and then some other ways you might want to use it. And I'm not sure if she's here yet, but our Google Partner Manager, McCall McIntyre, is supposed to be in the audience today, so everybody wave hi to McCall. And haven't seen any sign over on the chat, but if she does, just say hi. And for joining us today. And on to our Netgate news. We didn't have a Hangout last month, so there's a little bit of extra news this month. Our Tensor software package is now available on Netgate appliances. We have a press release there. You can read about it. We're going to offer that on the 5100, our XG 1537 and 1541 models for now, and more models in the future. We have some exciting plans there. But if you're interested in doing that, you might drop a line to our sales department and reach out. Our pfSense 244 release is out, which is one of the reasons we didn't have a Hangout last month. We're all really tied up with the release for that. We didn't have any time to spare. But if you haven't upgraded yet, be sure to carefully read through the blog post, the release notes, and the upgrade guide. This is a pretty big update. It's not one you want to skim the release notes about. Really get in there and read and look at all the issues and all the notes we've made and look for things that might apply to you, and also look for gotchas and things, and there's resolutions in there for all that stuff too. So just a lot to be aware of because of the operating system change. We moved to FreeBSD 11.2, and the PHP 7.2 change was a huge change as well, all under the hood stuff, but there are a lot of things there that you need to watch out for. One of those things is due to the way the upgrade system tries to track you onto the new release. When you check for updates, it's going to set you up to look for updates from the 244 repository. Now, the problem there is if you're on an older release and you try to install packages, we have some code now that tries to prevent you from doing that, but if you somehow or another are able to do that, there's a chance that you might accidentally break something because it's going to pull in a 244 version of something. It might reference a function you don't have, or it might pull in PHP packages and remove some of what you've already gotten. You'll end up with a partial upgrade just from managing a package, and you don't really want to do that. So really important that you upgrade to 244, or you can remove packages and then upgrade, or just upgrade and let it do the packages when you upgrade, but don't try to update packages before you upgrade. Let's see, the SG5100 device we talked about last Hangout is shipping now, and everybody loves it. So it's a good box, or a great little box. Our SG1000 unit, the little one, is now end of sale. We're still supporting it. We still got stock for RMAs. We're still testing with it. So it's not end of life. It's just end of sale. Just no new sales. We do have a new device coming very soon to take its place. So I'll have some details about that, but we're just not ready quite to announce everything publicly. But stay tuned for that. We'll have some exciting info there too. Our pfSense 2.3x line has reached its end of life. So if you've still got a firewall on 2.3, you could pull in some patches and stuff from the repo, maybe git sync, but there's not going to be another release there, and If you have something on there, you need to start enacting the plans that you had made to get it up to 2.4 or replace it with hardware that supports 2.4. I mean, I know there's people out there still running like 2.0 and older versions for years after it. It's just not a very secure practice, especially for something as important as your firewall. You want to make sure you get everything up to date there. Moving on, we have our dual Ethernet miniboard turbo devices. We've got, we lowered the price of the quad core down to $299, and both the dual core and the quad core have an optional black flame laser etching add-on, which looks really cool. I put a picture of it there. It's an extra add-on if you want to, I think I can't remember what the price is, but it's on the website. But it's an extra add-on. You can pay a little extra and get the cool flame look on there. And those devices are now shipping with a credit card size USB key with pfSense on it. It's actually the size and shape of a credit card. There's a little connector on it that flips out, and you just plug it in the bottom port on the turbo and turn it on, and it'll then run through the installer, and it's pretty slick. If you want some more information about those offers, we got those up on the web as well. We did have a Linux Foundation network survey that we participated in, the communication service providers. So if you do look on our, we have our blog post about that, and a link to the another posting about it. You go through that; it's pretty interesting. Also, earlier this week, Jim Thompson spoke at the Embedded Linux conference. It was pretty packed talk he was in. I was told it was standing room only. So I was talking about the technologies behind Tensor and how it's changing the high-end router market. So lots of good info going around. Okay, so what is LDAP? Now, we've talked about LDAP before. We've had hangouts on Radius and LDAP in the past, but you might have missed it, or you may not know what it is. You're just popping into this because you're interested in the G Suite stuff. So LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Use it for a lot of different reasons, primarily central authentication, saying, okay, is my login okay? Send me your username and password. It says, okay, yeah, that's a valid login. And then authorization, as in, okay, this user is a member of these groups. And then, you map those group permissions out to privileges on the firewall. And very common uses of this are OpenVPN or IPsec, just VPNs in general, computer network or server logins, use LDAP, IMAP POP3 type things, web applications, appliances, etc. It can be used as an organization directory, so like a central email contact repository for everybody in your organization. Now, if you're using the G Suite stuff, you're probably already using Gmail. You've already got all that stuff baked in. It's not as big of a thing. So your primary use here is probably going to be central authentication. But at its core, it stores data about people, groups, units, entities, computers, whatnot, departments, and it kind of groups all that together in a nice way. That's very handy for authorizing people and authenticating. So there's a variety of implementations out there, and they may be used directly or under the hood by certain things. Like there's Open LDAP, there's Google Cloud Identity out there now, Microsoft Active Directory, Apple Open Directory, Novell eDirectory, and a bunch of other things that integrate things that use Open LDAP under the hood. There's too many to list, but there's a lot of things that have an LDAP server baked in. It's really Open LDAP. So we have covered this previously. As I mentioned, there's a link here to our previous Radius and LDAP Hangout, the one we did for pfSense 2.4. At the end of the presentation, we'll have some more links, like to the book chapter on authentication. And we also did a Hangout on just the user manager and privileges, which might be handy for you as well, because we talk about exactly how a little bit more about how the privilege system works. We're not going to get into that a whole lot today. We'll look at how to do group permissions, but we won't get too terribly deep into that. Okay, so Google Cloud Secure LDAP, it's a new service that they're putting out. It's a secure LDAP service that ties back into Google Cloud Identity. So you can use it for authenticating cloud-hosted or on-premises applications or services. If you've already got all your email and drive storage and everything offloaded to Google, well, now you can use this for LDAP central-based auth. It's another thing you can hook into. So that way, if you are currently maintaining your own LDAP infrastructure locally, you can, forego that and use the hosted one instead if that's something you're comfortable with. So they also, as a part of all this, you've already got, if you're using this for your Drive and email and whatever, you've already got all the account management stuff there. You know how you can go in, make users, put them in groups, do whatever. Users can log in and maintain their own passwords, and that kind of administrative stuff. There's nothing baked into Open LDAP for that, for example. So that's something a lot of people take for granted. There's a lot of stuff to think about there that Google just kind of makes all that easier by offering this kind of service hooked into what they've already got. So this package is currently rolling out to Cloud Identity and G Suite Enterprise customers over the next few weeks. So you do have to have a certain level of product to get access to it. And there's some links there you can read up on the service on Google's side. I think some of the information may still be a little bit in flux. I think they might still be refining exactly who's going to get it when and what tiers are active and everything. So you can, if you're interested in that, you might want to contact your reps at Google and have a chat with them. Now, the setup we're going to go over today is also described in the online pfSense docs. If you look at the URL there, it's pretty much the same thing I'm going to go over here today, but with a bit more detail in the video and showing you how it's done versus just the text instructions. So why would you want to do something like this? Well, if you're a big company or even a moderate sized company, you got multiple locations out there, you're already hooked into G Suite Enterprise using email and drive storage, team drives and whatnot. You just don't want to bother with running a local LDAP server, but you want to take advantage of authenticating everybody centrally. Like you may have a bunch of different devices out there, like your firewalls, that have each have their own separate account databases, or you can VPN everywhere, but everybody's got to have all their VPN credentials replicated everywhere, which it can be kind of a pain. Using a central auth server, you could choose to do it yourself and do it at a central location, or you can, but you're still maintaining a separate database from what you're already paying them to do. So you might just kind of roll it into what they're doing, and then it saves you some local administrative overhead. Like I mentioned, not just for central auth for firewalls and devices, but also for VPNs. Pretty much anywhere you're going to use a hosted service because it'll have less local overhead and management than maintaining a local service. But as with anything, there's always your big security versus convenience trade-off and other similar trade-offs here. So any hosted service or centrally located service, you're going to have some concerns. The classic trade-off, you got ease of management versus loss of control. So it's easy to do this on Google, but you don't have as much control as you would over your entire LDAP schema and everything. Maybe you have a lot invested in a system you've designed and is working well for your company. In that case, maybe you might want to keep it local, but you may decide that it's not worth the hassle, the management, the overhead, whatever. So it's up to you and your organization to decide that. But there's a lot of convenience and ease to be had by offloading that as well. But since it's not controlled locally, you do have to have some level of trust or risk involved. So the question here that people seem to ask is, do you trust Google to handle this task? Well, if you're already involved with them doing cloud identity and G Suite, they've got your email, your drive storage, all that stuff, that's something your organization has really already decided. You've already got your eggs in their basket for that, so you may as well keep going that way if you want, but there's always going to be a line, and your company needs to decide where that line is. So because it's a remote service, the service is contingent on it being accessible. So you have to have an active internet connection and the service has to be up. Now, pfSense will fall back to local authentication when you're using it for a web interface login. If for whatever reason it can't reach the LDAP server, you can always use a local admin account or a local account with that's not admin, or maybe just says admin privileges. So that's something you can kind of work around. But if you have, even if you were just centrally hosting your own and you have multiple locations, you'd have the same concern there. If a remote office, for whatever reason, can't reach the main office, it could be down. Now, there are some things like Active Directory that'll work around that with having local copies of domain controllers and everything like that. So, I mean, there are some ways around that to some extent. But this sort of, it's just a different consideration you have to take into advisement there. So the primary factor there, it's the reliability of your ISP or your infrastructure and available redundant connectivity. Like maybe you have multi-WAN, maybe you have, from different providers, and you're fine. Whereas if you're in a place that has really shaky internet connectivity, odds are if you're in that situation, you probably wouldn't be using Google for email or Drive because you'd want your stuff locally. So again, these are hurdles you've probably already cleared, but they're still worth mentioning because maybe not everybody has. And that's not specific to Google or even this service. It's just anything internet connected. If you're doing cloud anything, you're going to have to be able to reach the cloud to get it. Now, in terms of reliability, there's not really a lot to worry about that. I mean, service availability concerns are pretty low where Google's concerned. They've got a good track record of having stuff online. And I mean, usually if there's an outage, it's going to affect a bunch of people and everybody's complaining at a time, but it's very short-lived if it happens. And one thing people had a concern about, I'm not sure exactly where they might have had the concern, but it was raised a couple of times when we first were talking about this. They're like, why do I want to hook my firewall up to Google? But so it doesn't really give them a way to reach back into your firewall. It's only a one-way communication here in terms of the way it's initiated. The firewall is going to query the LDAP server. The LDAP server is going to respond, with results of that query, yay or nay, and then all the user information that comes along with it, group memberships and whatnot. So it's not going to let them come back to you. It's just making a query to them, just like going to a web server. It's not opening a server port for them to get back to. Okay, so currently, last I heard anyway, a few days ago, this requires an account using Cloud Premium or G Suite Enterprise tiers. I don't know what their plans are there. I know there's a lot of other tiers out there for businesses and education and flexible plans and things like that. That's something you may have to ping your rep about and see if they might be able to get some answers for you there. If you do have access to it, Google has a setup document, which I've linked here. It walks you through everything about setting up LDAP and doing your account credentials and everything else in there. So you want to hit that link, follow through that stuff exactly. I can't really show you that here because well, number one, I'm not an account manager on our Google account, and number two, it varies by your organization. And what I would do there with my users wouldn't be the same thing that you do with your users. So they have some some good info there, and they try to keep it general. But at the same time, a lot of what you're going to do there is for your organization only. In a part of doing that setup process, you will want to generate some access credentials and downloaded certificates. So when you're downloading the certificate, I believe it should have a separate file for the certificate and the key, and I think it's in PEM format already, so you shouldn't have to worry about converting it or doing anything crazy there. During the setup process, it will generate access credentials because you do need bind credentials, and that's what we're going to use them for. And it'll be a username and password, and I believe it randomly generates that for you. And there's a link there to exactly how you do that, and that just lets your LDAP client, which is the firewall in this case, supply a username and password so that you have to have that authentication to get any information back about your company. So somebody couldn't anonymously, without those bind credentials, hit that LDAP server and suck out some info about your company without you wanting them to do that. So that's a pretty important thing. And while you're doing that setup, you do need to make some groups and add members to those groups. So if you want somebody to have access to the firewall as an administrator, you want to make a group there. And these group names have to match exactly on Google Cloud and on pfSense. So like, for example, I'm going to use in our example today a group called FW admins. And it's just literally the group is F, letter W, admins, plural, all run together, no spaces. And I have, that's just a group that is on our Google Cloud accounts. And then we have users that we have added to that group. And then I make the same group on pfSense, and that's what we're going to start going over. So the first step on pfSense is going to be to import the certificate. And I've got all the instructions here, but it's a fairly straightforward process, just like any other certificate. You go to System, Certificate Manager, on the Certificates tab, click Add, click or change the method down to Import, Give it a name. I called it, what I say, Google Cloud LDAP client. And then you paste in your certificate data here and your private key data down here. You want make sure it ends on a new line. I think we had one of them where it didn't, and I think S-Tunnel didn't like that. But so if you have the certificate data, just make sure that after you've pasted it in, at the very end, you make sure the cursor is on a new line. Same thing with the private key data. Make sure it's got a new line at the end. When you paste it, when you're done, you hit save. You'll come back here to the certificates tab, and it'll look just like this: Google Cloud LDAP client, self-signed, and it's got their subject there and everything else. So. And this is valid for a couple of years. So this is just will be used as a client certificate by the LDAP client or S-Tunnel, depending on how we're going to set this up for you. And that just makes sure that not any random LDAP client can hit the Google service as well. It's got to be somebody that has this certificate. So it's just another layer of authentication or authorization that you need that is between the public and your account information on Google. Now, the next step from here, they kind of branch out a little bit. We have a different procedure slightly for CE or even just factory 244 because it needs S-Tunnel. And then for our factory 244 P1, we did add client certificate support into the LDAP client settings. And I'm going to show you both methods, but I'll do the S-Tunnel method first because that's what most people have access to right now. And then we'll cover the other one as well. So there's some settings that are the same for both at the beginning, and they kind of branch out in the middle, and then there's the same settings at the end. So we'll kind of go through those here. So first up, we need to set up S-Tunnel. So if you're on CE or Factory 244 earlier, which is most people right now, the LDAP client it doesn't have client certificate support, only server certificate support. So we need to hook in S-Tunnel for this, and the S-Tunnel will set up and maintain an encrypted tunnel so you can reach Google securely for your LDAP traffic. And it does require S-Tunnel package version 5.37 or 537. So if you have S-Tunnel installed, make sure it's that version. If you're or install the package if you don't have it installed yet. If you're not on 244, get up to 244. As I mentioned before, you upgrade your packages because you won't be able to get that on 243 P1 or earlier. So yeah, if it's not installed, just go to System Package Manager on the Available Packages tab, search for S-Tunnel, pick it from the list, and click Install, then Confirm, and off you go. So what we need to do here in S-Tunnel is it's just under, let me go back over here, this one, Services, S-Tunnel. And then we're just going to make an entry that looks exactly like this. First up, put in your description, which I've called Google Cloud Secure LDAP. You want to make sure you check client mode because this is a client and this is going to be using a client certificate to connect to a server. Listen on IP. I have localhost in here, 127.0.0.1. Now you could, if you wanted to, like put this on your LAN address, or say you have a DMZ or management network where your authentication traffic normally happens. You could have something that only supports LDAP but doesn't support a client certificate, hit the same S-Tunnel connection, and get through to Google that way. I don't know if I'd recommend doing that unless it's a very secure segment, because you don't want even locally going over the wire, LDAP account information that's not encrypted. Again, it's a trade-off, up to you, however you think would best do that. So I'm doing this on localhost. Again, you can vary that based on whatever you want to do. Localhost for your listen on IP, listen on port is going to be 1636. And that could be whatever port you want, really. It's just a matter of, we just pick this one because it's convenient, and you can use, and it just has to be consistent with what you set in the LDAP client settings. Now, our certificate is the Google Cloud LDAP client certificate that we imported a few steps ago. Redirects to IP is the ldap.google.com. That's the Google Cloud Identity LDAP server, the secure LDAP server. And that we're going to redirect to port 636, which is the TLS encrypted LDAP port for that service. You shouldn't have to mess with the outgoing source IP. You can if you want it to come from a specific local address, before it goes out, like use a specific WAN or whatever. But that's entirely up to you. Most people, you just leave it blank. You don't really care where it goes. And after you're all done with that, hit save. And let's set up the LDAP client. So this particular scenario, again, is still using our S-tunnel settings. So we're going to go here under System User Manager, go to Authentication Servers, and we've got our Google Cloud Secure LDAP entry here. I'm just going to edit this. When you add a new one, it's going to look just about the same. There's going to be a profile field. You can just ignore that on a new entry. So your descriptive name, I've just called it Google Cloud Secure LDAP. Type is LDAP. And then here's where you point it to whatever you did for S-tunnel. I've got mine on localhost and port 1636. So that's what I put here. If you used a different value for S-tunnel for the host name or IP address or the port, plug those in here. Now, because LDAP is going to be communicating through S-tunnel, you want to use TCP for your transport, not SSL, because the encryption between this LDAP client and S-tunnel needs to be unencrypted, and then S-tunnel will handle the encryption from there on. So protocol version 3, server timeout 25, and your search scope is your entire subtree. I'll get back to the other settings down below, but here's where it kind of branches off a little bit. And we're going to go over here and look at the factory settings now for 2.4.4 patch 1 and later. Or I've got this one on a 2.4.5 snapshot, and it works the same there. So for this one, we come over here to System and User Manager, Authentication Servers tab, and do the same thing, except we're connecting straight to Google, ldap.google.com on port 636 with SSL encrypted transport. The peer certificate authority didn't matter for the other one because we were just using TCP, but for this one, we need to have it set to the global root CA list. And that just lets us verify the server. Client certificate, pick Google Cloud LDAP client, and then that will use that client certificate when it's making that connection. We've got protocol version 3, server timeout 25 again, search scope entire subtree. Now the server timeout is something I need to go back and explain a little bit more, because that's something that you might want to lower or you might want to raise. Most people want to lower it. 25 is not awful, but if the LDAP server is up but unreachable, like say your internet connection is down, every time it tries to get your groups and everything to check your page access for every page you load, it's going to have to wait for that to time out. So you might want to lower that in cases when you expect some spotty connectivity, maybe, just because it's going to make you wait that long for a page to load before it falls back to local authentication, which is not ideal. But the 25 seconds we have here now is not awful. It used to, without specifying it, the timeout was like minutes, and that was just atrocious. Okay, so the next part of this is going to depend on your organization. So I can show you an example. Like I've got example.com here, and I've got pfSense.org actually plugged in on the firewall in the background. You really want to make sure that you put in your own organization settings here, because anything else is not going to work. You need to set your base DN to your domain name in DN format. So if your domain name is example.com, then you need to put in DC equals example, comma, DC equals com, and that's the distinguished name format. Your authentication containers are going to be that base DN prepended with OU equals users and another comma. So just like I've shown here, OU equals users, comma, DC equals example, comma, DC equals com. And you want to uncheck bind credentials, and that will show you the bind credentials box that has a username and password. And in that box is where you plug in the secure LDAP username and password that were generated for you when you did the setup on Google. And you'll want to set the usernaming attribute to UID, group naming attribute to CN, and group member attribute to member of, and the capital is important here, I believe, on that one. So make sure it's UID, CN, and member of, and those don't match up any existing profile that we have, that we might sneak one in before patch 1 still. But for now, if you just leave it on like whatever the default is, open LDAP, whatever, and just make sure these line up. So UID, CN, member of, just enter manually. And that's all you really have to set. You can do the UTF-8 encoding if you have international characters in your password, usernames, and whatever. So you might want to check that, but it's not required. All right, so now that's it for the server setup, but we're going to skip back a little bit and create our groups before we go and test that. So when you're using LDAP auth here for pfSense for the GUI, the permissions get mapped over to users, to how it determines their authorization level or authorization privileges. That's based on the group names. And the group names they get have to be matched remotely and locally. So your group name on Google has to map your group name on pfSense, and they have to match exactly. So if an LDAP member is a user as a member of a group, and that group exists on pfSense with the same name, then the privileges from that group also apply to that user when they log in. And it also will match an LDAP username. If you have a local user and an LDAP user and they have the same username, then the LDAP user will also get the permissions of that local user. But managing users in both places is what we're trying to avoid. So that's kind of a silly thing to do. So groups are where it's at. So earlier we already made the Google Cloud groups and added members. Now you need to make a matching entry on pfSense. So to do that, we just need to go to System and User Manager and the Groups tab. And this is a two-step process. First, you have to make the group and save it. Then you have to go back and edit the group and add privileges. So when you first make a group, you'll just come here to group name, and mine was called FW admins. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And you just make your scope remote, because it's a remote group. So it won't exist locally like in the groups file on the firewall. Description, I think I put like Google LDAP or remote LDAP users or LDAP, or remote administrators LDAP, something like that. And you don't have to put anybody in the group manually. So really all you need, group name, scope remote, description, save. And once you save that group, and then you'll go back and hit the pencil here to edit, and now you'll have a privileges section. And you can see here, I've got this one set for web config all pages, which basically gives it GUI admin access to the entire GUI. If you want to get more fine grained with that, you can. But when you're adding privileges here, you can just pick and choose from the list. But whatever you do, do not just select everything, because you might get something you don't want. Like this here, deny config right privilege. If you have that selected on the user's privileges, then if they try to save a page, the config change will just get tossed out because they don't have permission to do that. So we've had that happen a lot in the past. People are like, well, why can't my LDAP users make changes to my firewall? Well, it's because you have the deny config right privilege on the group. So yeah, don't do that. If you want to give somebody full access, give them that one web config all pages privilege, and that's really all they need. But if you want to get specific and only give them certain pages or functions, just go through and pick the ones they're allowed to have. But don't just select all, because that's a bad practice to get into. So we've got our web config all pages privilege, so I can get anywhere I want. And it does tell you when you've added a privilege that effectively gives somebody administrator level access, it does warn you. There are several privileges that will do that. Like if you give somebody access to the backup restore page, they could make a backup, edit that however they want, and upload it. So it's essentially like giving them full access to the firewall. So there are some warnings like that. And if you're interested in the finer points of that, there's information on that in the docs, and there's information in that in previous Hangouts we've done on user and privilege management. So after you've got all your privileges set and everything, go ahead and hit save. They'll take you back to the group screen, and you'll see it here. Now it should say member count 0 because we don't have any members that are local that are a member of that. Now on to the fun part, testing. So the easiest way to test is just go to diagnostics, authentication. And for the authentication server, you want to pick Google Cloud Secure LDAP. And then you just enter your username, which should be Jim P here, and put in that password, assuming I typed it right. It should, there, boom, authenticated successfully, and it shows I'm a member of the right group. Now, that's a perfect result. That's what you want to see. If it was successful, it should list your groups if you matched everything right. If it worked but you don't have any groups, then something didn't line up. Either your group name didn't match, or something about that group name is different. So you got to go back and make sure that your group name on Google matches the one on pfSense precisely, 100%. If the authentication failed, there could be a variety of reasons. Maybe it couldn't actually reach the LDAP server, or maybe the authorization was rejected. You have to go back in the main system log and look for that. LDAP kind of makes it a little tricky to pick out and show on the page, but it's not that hard to show in the log. So just go to status and system logs, and it'll show you what happened there. Now, one thing that is a little quirky with our current LDAP implementation, and something we're working to fix over time. When you make a secure LDAP connection, PHP sets up some environment variables containing the SSL information, like where to find the certificates and things like that. And sometimes that environment gets a little out of sync between all of the PHP processes. So if you make changes to that, not necessarily the first time setting it up, but if you're troubleshooting and you need to go back and change things, you'll want to go to the console, the physical console, or connect to SSH. Run option 16 and then option 11. That'll reset PHP and reset the web server, just to make sure that everything has a consistent environment. And when you go back and, if you're testing a diag auth and it's, if you're getting a result you don't expect, that's another, one of the first things I try, just to make sure we've got a good test setup there. Let's see. It only checks the first part of the username by default here, because the domain part's handled by your DN and your auth containers. So if you have, I just use gimp, but if I do gimp at pfSense.org, it would have ignored everything from the @ on. Or if I do gimp at Netgate, same thing. It just looks at the gimp part. Or like I said here in the example in the docs here, joe@example.com, also the same as joe@movie.edu, because it slices off the @ and anything after it. There is an option where you can have the LDAP client keep that and send that on, but you really don't want to do that because it's just not necessary. Especially in this case, because your domain is going to be the DN you've got set up in your auth containers in the LDAP client. All right, hold on a second. Get rid of that sidebar there. So if you want to use LDAP for the administration logins, then first off, you want to make sure you're getting a good result, like we have here, where you've authenticated successfully and it shows you in the group. And you want to make sure that ahead of time that this only is going to work for the GUI. It's not going to let you get into SSH with LDAP. So if you want to do that, just go up to System, User Manager, on the Settings tab, and then you just need to pick your Google Cloud Secure LDAP server entry here, whatever you call it. Do that, you click Save, and then you can log in as that. Now, if we look back here at the main page, you can see I've logged in as admin, and it did that with local database fallback because I was already set to log in there. So let me log out. I'm going to log in as myself here. And now you'll see it's got me logged in as gimp and then it's my workstation address with LDAP, and the service used was Google Cloud Secure LDAP. And I can always log out and use the admin fallback to get back in if I need to. There's my local database fallback. So again, if all that worked, great. If it didn't, then you need to go back, retrace your steps, go back through everything, make sure everything lined up and passes the auth test. So what else might you want to use this for? You could use it for VPN auth if all users are going to have access. users will still need their individual TLS certs if you want to use OpenVPN. You can do it without certs in OpenVPN if you want. It's easier to do because everybody can have the same client, but it's less secure because you don't have that extra factor of the certificate. You can use it with IPsec as well. You can do, you could add multiple LDAP server entries that use an extended filter to filter by groups, then use those for OpenVPN or IPsec. That way, because OpenVPN and IPsec don't read the groups and check for permissions like the GUI does, so you have to, they just get a pass-fail based on the entire auth server they use. So you could have another entry set up just filtering just one group, like a VPN users group. That could work. You could also have a central captive portal auth source for the entire company. Like you've got, like a guest network everywhere, and you just have to log in and everybody share, everybody can get access that way, that sort of thing, like a BYOD network. So, I mean, that's all there really is to cover today. If you got any questions, feel free to ask them. We also, it looks like McCall is answering some questions about the product tiers in the chat as well. I have links up here to additional resources for LDAP and privileges, like from the book and previous Hangouts. So I guess if you have any questions, let's hear them. I know sometimes it takes a while to type out a question. If you do have a question, you can type something short. Let me know it's coming. That way I don't cut anybody off.